Yeah, why does Pittsburgh fit into their agenda? So I think it fits in.
Well, back in May, we were told...
Can you guys listen?
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah. Bring it.
Let me get this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, why don't I try to do this the right way? Can you? How about now? No? Okay. Okay. Back at the end of May of this year, we were called by our convention center that said, you need to send somebody over because we have a secret government group that wants to suggest or wants to look at Pittsburgh for a meeting. And the meeting is going to take place in September. And will you just send somebody? So we sent one of our sales directors who is responsible for the government meeting segment. And when she came back, she said, you're not going to believe this, they're looking at us for G20. And I laughed to myself and I said, they're probably using us. And this happens a lot in your business and our business, is that they probably really wanted to go to New York. Better. They probably really wanted to go to New York or Washington, but they're using us to try to get the price down. And
typical Pittsburgh reaction.
Well, yeah, we're not worthy. By the way, the people that are standing over there, there are a whole bunch of seats over here. Okay.
Come on back.
The reaction was this: is that we felt that we're, at least my initial reaction was that we're getting used, and that was not to be, because as I started to group her about what, when, where, and how, we found out that they wanted to know about our convention center, and they wanted to know, is your convention center open on the 24th and 25th and the days leading up to that in September? And invariably the answer was yes. So she also said to me that as they were leaving, there was the group of the White House advance team. They kind of nudged her and said, get ready, we think this is coming. So it became very real. And it's not the first time that a salesperson has said to me, well, this is going to happen, and it didn't, but in this case it did. So to make a long story short, about 3 days later, they called us and said, get ready, it's going to come to Pittsburgh. And then we had to do a little bit of negotiation in terms of what it would cost for certain things. And then we had to whip up we had to find 3,500 rooms in the region. And then we also, on top of that, had to build a website for in about 5 days. And because we were able to come up with that information very quickly and succinctly, along with our partners, we were awarded the G-20.
Typically, the Allegheny Conference doesn't get in the middle of stuff like this. That's what they do for a living, right? They book conventions and conferences, they fill our hotel rooms, they market the region for tourism and hospitality. In the conference, we just pat them on the back and say, great job, keep it up. But in this particular case, obviously, because of the nature of this event, the magnitude of it, the content around economics, global economics, and whatever, Joe McGrath over at VisitPittsburgh calls my boss, Dennis Yablonsky, and says, I want to take you to lunch, I'm going to tell you what's coming up. And when I first heard about it, I thought that poor old Joe was hallucinating. That, man, it must be a really bad year in the hospitality business, because poor old Joe McGrath, you know, he actually thinks the G20 is coming to Pittsburgh. The guy, I've known him for years, he's a great guy, he totally lost it. And so it took us about 24 hours for it really to sink in, and for us, even at the conference, to think, you know what? This is real. And we had sort of, that was right ahead of the Memorial Day weekend. It was kind of when this was all happening from our standpoint. And so we had basically that long holiday weekend to really let it sink in and think about what do we do with this? You know, what is the opportunity and everything else? And Carla asked us, you know, why? Why in the world did they make that phone call? I mean, the answer is the only person who probably knows for sure is President Obama. What we've been told, obviously, everybody's heard the Gibbs news conference when the White House press corps laughed when they were informed that Pittsburgh was going to be the setting for the G20. And Gibbs went on to say that the rationale was because this is a region that had really transformed itself, that had turned itself around. And so you kind of have to take that on face value. Clearly, the Obama administration wanted to send a message. They wanted a place that would reinforce the message that they were trying to convey about economic recovery, and that's how this whole G20 thing started. You know, the G20 has been around for about 10 years, since 1999, but the heads of state only met for the first time last fall in Washington, D.C., and then they reconvened in April in London, and now they're coming to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh for their third meeting. So we think that you have to take what the White House said at face value, that they are coming here because they want the world to learn a lesson. They really do believe that Pittsburgh can be a case study. Now, why, you might ask, would Barack Obama have drawn that conclusion or even known what the heck was happening in Pittsburgh? And this is where we get into kind of reading the tea leaves a little bit and kind of looking at what's happened over the last year or so and doing a little guesswork. And so the next thing I'm going to tell you is interpretation. It's not fact. And so please take it at that level. But I think Pittsburgh found itself in this position for a variety of ways. Number one, the fundamental concept that this is a region that has turned itself around and transformed itself is dead on accurate. And if you look at what's happened here over the last 30 years, it's really one of the biggest economic comebacks in the United States in the second half of the 20th century and now in the 21st century. So we have the underlying story to support it. The unemployment rate here is about 2 points below the national average. First time in a generation that the unemployment rate in Pittsburgh has been below the national average during a recession. Hasn't happened in the working career of anybody in this room. So the fundamentals were there, they were in our favor. Then there's the politics of this. And if you think back to last year, remember at the time this came along in May, President Obama had only been president for what, 4 months? But he'd actually spent a lot of time in Pennsylvania. So you think back to last year, the Pennsylvania primary, and we all know, usually the Pennsylvania primary means absolutely nothing, right? It's so late in the primary cycle that the race is over by the time they get here. And every year, every 4 years, we kind of debate as the Commonwealth, well, should we move our primary? You know, we want to be in the game. We want to be part of the decision making. We never get around to it, this being Pennsylvania, right? But at any rate, it worked out because as it so happened, yeah, we came at the end of the cycle this year, but Senator Clinton and Senator Obama were still neck and neck. It was a real horse race down to the wire. And so that meant they were coming to Pennsylvania. And the other fluke of it was the last big cluster of primaries was a month before. So you had this time period, which never happens, where there was about 4 weeks where both Clinton and Obama spent an enormous amount of time in Pennsylvania. And so we think that, and based on some of what Obama's senior staff has told us, that they actually had enough time here to really experience Pittsburgh and to really understand the transformation story and to have it take hold. Another guess is, for whatever reason, Obama has this really intriguing relationship with Dan Rooney. So much so that Dan took candidate Obama on a tour of our Green Convention Center during the election last year. So he got a personal tour of a Green Convention Center. And now think of where we are today in terms of sort of the geopolitics of this, issues of the environment, issues of economic recovery. Obama is thinking, presumably, what's the right backdrop? What's the story? How can I tell this? You do this all the time in campaigning, right? You kind of try to pick the backdrop that reinforces the message you want to deliver. That's standard presidential campaign politics sort of stuff. So at any rate, we kind of fit the bill if you look at kind of where a lot of the policies of the Obama administration seem to be right now. So that's another reason. And I think finally, just what Craig said at the beginning, we were available. If it had been a week before the AFL-CIO convention, right? We would have been off the table, wouldn't have happened. The last thing I would say, because there's been a lot of talk around town, everybody turned it down and it wound up in Pittsburgh because we were the last one standing. It was supposed to be in New York City. That's true. If you went online after this was announced and you went to the University of Toronto website and you saw the New York Summit in September, it took them almost a week from after the announcement to change the name to the Pittsburgh Summit. But we were part of a very small group, and whether we were at the top of their list or not, Pittsburgh right out of the gate made an enormously short list. And that's stuff that I think you'd agree 10 years ago, 20 years ago, wouldn't have happened. Pittsburgh wouldn't have made the list at all.
I have to agree completely.